am so excited because I get to reconnect with a great friend, Matthew Dowd, who he and I spent some time on the ABC set together, trying to get people to listen to us. Of course, we're polite Catholic school kids, and so we don't interrupt, but other people do. But Matthew, you have so much political experience, and really, I think, have your voice has emerged as a voice of reason in America, looking at the reality of the situation, not left or right, but pay attention to what we see in front of us. And so I'm so grateful that you would join us. I want to first ask, obviously you spent time in the George W. Bush administration. You think about those first impressions in the first 100 days. How important is the first 100 days for an administration in terms of setting the tone for that first term?
Well, Heidi, great to be with you, and thank you for asking me. And again, love to reconnect with you. I've been missed you along the way, and our discussions, which were pretty much in sync on almost everything, and how we look at America. I think it's incredibly important. I remember in 2000, a project that I took on in December as the decisions were getting made about who was going to be president, to put together a binder for then incoming President Bush and his administration on the first 100 days and what we needed to do and what other presidents have done. And it's driven by the fact that it really, first of all, you have, in most presidents, usually have the most political capital in the first 100 days. So it's their ability to use that capital that then begins usually to diminish over that time or after that time. So they can get done more of what they want to get done using that capital. The second thing is it really sets the impression for the American public about what your priorities are, what you're focused on, whether or not you make mistakes, whether or not you trip and fall. All of those things are set impressions that you could change, but it's more difficult to change once you begin to set those impressions in the first few months of the administration, the first 100 days. FDR understood this. He's really the first one that really pushed the idea of the first 100 days in this. And every president after understood all of that. So I think it's important, though I'll say one thing. We may be in an unusual time because of the circumstances of where our country is, that the Biden may have a couple of different opportunities post 100 days to reframe, because we have, we're going to be emerging, as you know, from the pandemic as we are, but also is there, and which we can talk about, is the disruptive nature of our politics today may give him an opportunity to have at some point another 100 days in this. But I think he understood, and the administration understands how important it is, the impressions you leave, and to use your political capital to try to get as much as you can done in the first 100 days.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been preaching to anyone who will listen is that Washington is irretrievably broken right now. And if you
Yep.
want to get things done, come out to the country, sit down with governors. Governors have to govern, they have to make decisions. They love an infrastructure plan because it gives them a chance to make investments in their state. How do you think this president has done, kind of getting out of the Beltway and moving in circles where he maybe has a more favorable audience to persuade?
I think they've been very smart in one huge aspect of this. First of all, Biden speaks the language of people outside of Washington better than most U.S. senators, as you know, do. He doesn't often go back into, like John Kerry used to do, of like Senate speak. So he speaks the language. He also is from there, so he has some relation to people out in the country of that. And I think they have done, and which I've tried to say, and I know you have, is to try to define bipartisanship outside of what Washington, D.C. thinks bipartisanship is. And the president has a level of bipartisanship around the country that doesn't exist in Washington. There's independents, Republicans, and Democrats, agree with his pandemic relief. They agree with the infrastructure package. They agree with all that. But you wouldn't know that if all you did was talk to people in Washington, D.C. And so I think the more he can define the level of bipartisanship outside of Washington, where it exists, as you say, in states and in cities and in counties, the better. I think their only problem is they get trapped into this sort of process problem of trying to convince, and much of it is the media, that they're bipartisan by whether or not Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell goes along with what they want. And I think that's a trap that they have to avoid. They've sometimes fallen in it. But I think they have to really push back on the media on how do we define bipartisanship in America today.
Absolutely. And you know what's exciting about what you just said? You defined it by policy, not personality. Not,
Yep.
well, do I like this guy or not like this guy? Is this somebody who has a plan for the future of America? And I think, the one thing that, I know Joe Biden pretty well, and so do you. One thing I can tell you with great certainty, he really loves his ideas and he can go out and sell them. I kind of resemble that remark because I always told people, why are you so enthusiastic? I said, because I just fall in love with my ideas. And I think that he has spent a lot of time, in especially the last 4 years, looking at things. What would I do differently? How would I do this? And I think that prepared him to answer some of those questions. But my concern is that now our media has become so centralized. No one buys, Matthew, a local newspaper anymore. They're just watching Fox News or they're watching MSNBC. So we've got to find some way to actually communicate with people, outside of kind of the echo chamber. And I think that's a difficult, lift for anyone right now in politics. The fact we used to say, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics are local. The transition has been all politics are national.
You
And
know, Heidi, I'm going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to say something on that. So it's so true. And I'll give you a perfect example. In 2004, when I was chief strategist for Bush Cheney, there was always these people running around about what's on cable and what's on CNN and what's getting talked about and all of that. And I finally said, I don't want to hear any about that. I said, every morning I had somebody on the campaign give me a copy of the front page of 14 local papers around the country. 14 local papers around the country. And I said, if it's not on the front page of the local paper, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it. I'm not going to focus on it because that's not what Americans really, the most of Americans are fundamentally focused on here. I think that the Biden administration is catching up to that. But part of the problem and the pandemic and the response to the pandemic and all of that is a perfect example, which I think they've done a fabulous job on. But part of the failure of it is not empowering more local people to be the messenger and to carry the message. A perfect
yeah,
example is our local church here. And as you know, I live in a small town in a more rural area, which is split between Trump voters and Biden voters, we'll say. Our church here, the church here, 92% of the people at the church have been vaccinated. 92%. And why is that? Is because the local minister took it on as something that he wanted to be involved in and constantly communicated with people in the church. They didn't want to listen to Washington, D.C., but they were willing to listen to their local folks. And I think that's something that politicians in Washington have to understand way more of.
do you think, I think you and I have had this conversation about lazy politicians and politicians who would rather see their face on MSNBC than do a local talk radio show, right? And so I think part of that is that there is this thinking that, oh, if I said it once in Washington, everybody knows, what I think. And it's like, no, this is communication 101. The mother milk of communication is repetition and knowing where your audience gets their information. And so I was intrigued by Ohio. He's been this governor has been such an interesting kind of case study in, why it was we used to respect the Republican Party, but now he's running a lottery for vaccinations. So
Yep.
I mean, well, if ever there was an example in the last year of this kind of laboratory of democracy, laboratory of ideas, I think it's this one. I think it's fascinating, and it really kind of gets people thinking. Quit thinking Fauci is going to convince anyone to get a shot. He's not. If you were going to be convinced by Fauci, you're convinced. So what's the next level, and who are the next persuaders? And
Yeah.
whether it's motivated by a minister, or whether it's motivated by pure greed. I mean, we had one story about offering free beer if you went and got, you got a free beer if you went and got a shot. Worked pretty well.
Well, and I think the level of trust of politicians as Washington D.C. is at such a low. Though Biden is, as you know, is his approval rating, it actually continues to tick up because I think his performance, people see his performance. But overall, the leadership in Washington D.C. is at an incredible low, while the leadership of local officials is still at a high. And so, if you were going to think who people trust more, to who they're going to hear from, whether it's a minister, a mayor, many of the governors. That's who they're going to listen to in this, much more so than somebody. I mean, I think the last approval rating of Congress I saw was they were at 14% positive, 82% negative. Nobody's going to listen to them regardless of this. And I think the other problem, as you alluded to, is that, if you add up all of the audiences for cable news, it's about 20 million people. I'll add up all of the audience, Fox and CNN and MSNBC. 159 million people voted in the last election. So that's what we have to understand is there's this huge, the same is true of Twitter and other social media, which I'm on and you're on social media. It's an important information vehicle, but most Americans are not sitting there having a debate on Twitter.
Well, if I can just put a shameless plug in for your Twitter feed, I read it every day and am inspired. You give great quotes, a great inspiration. And then, the thing that you do that you don't see a lot right now in either the media, because they're, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's not controversial, they don't want to hear about it. But it's kind of like calling out the truth.
Yep.
And saying, look, a child killed in the Mideast, regardless of how they were, how they lost their lives, is a tragedy no matter what. Can we just all agree on that? And all the stuff that you send out is just so common sense, but yet it's kind of not where the dialogue is. Why is that, Matthew?
Well, I think I think that you've touched on it, which is this just high emotional content, and I get people's passions and I get all of that, but at some point, I always reflect on how I'm gonna talk to family and friends where I live or who I'm around, and they may have divergent opinions from mine. But I actually have the only way I can really connect with people. I think people have to put politics secondarily to the conversations until they connect at some other level. Because we all share, as you fully know, we all share sorrows and joys, and we all share. I think most Americans share some common set of values that integrity matters and honesty matters, and we should care about our fellow citizens and give them respect and all of that. And I think we need to constantly try to move back to that. Instead of getting into this name calling and complete political, like if you're the opposite side of me, then you're evil. And there are some bad things that are happening, as you fully know well. And January 6th is one of those really bad things that happened that we need to call out. But I would much prefer people to connect at their shared sense of values first, and then move into a political conversation.
Yeah, I'm working right now on an effort to try and bring in energy workers into the carbon conversation. What you hear from is energy leaders, whether it's CEOs of major oil and gas companies or solar companies. You hear from politicians, you hear from scientists, but there's a real impact out there for workers, and I think that one of the challenges that we have to bring back people into a kind of common American mission is they have to be heard. But yet, to your point, when was the last time you actually saw a guy who came off the offshore rig, or the guy who was on the rig here who didn't, want to say something politically, interesting? How do we know about his life? And
You
so,
know,
or her.
Heidi, I think that's so important. And I'm going to just one critical thing. I think of, and I, as you know, I left ABC at the end of January. This idea that people that go on television and that go on the media have to be dressed, and I'm just going to give you one, have to be dressed in a suit and tie and say things in a certain way. I think it's so out of whack with where people are, especially in rural America. I would much prefer somebody in a Carhartt jacket telling me something in just layman's terms about what's going on or how they're affected or what's happening or what's their view, then this whole sort of dressed up model of how we do things, I actually think that's where most people in America are. Just tell me some common sense thing and use words that I know what they mean, and don't talk to me in a arrogant manner. Don't act like you know more than I know, which is a huge part of the problem out of Washington D.C.
Yeah. I mean, I did a seminar at U Chicago, and I brought in a great friend of mine who's a Boilermaker. And Boilermakers, if you're familiar with what they do,
Yep.
they basically work in coal-fired power plants. And so
Yep.
this is a, I mean, they're a union in transition. They're a workforce in transition. And you should have seen, I mean, he was eloquent. He was, I mean, in his own way. I think that was maybe the most valuable 1 hour that the University of Chicago kids had in probably a whole semester of their time. Just to be able to hear someone tell it from his perspective. Look, we think there's climate's a problem, but how am I going to make a living? And this is the concern of the people I lead. And it was just such an eye-opening experience for these kids. But you never see that, because if it bleeds, I mean, okay, I think we can have a long conversation about Liz Cheney, but do we need to have 5 days of Liz Cheney right now? Right. I mean, because that's, let's get to the controversy, because that's going to drive up listenership, but it doesn't unite the country. And I think the media has an obligation to tell stories and to introduce topics that are important and critical, but they may not be, calling out somebody for being a bad guy. They may just be, this is what's happening in the world today.
Well, and I think so true, Heidi. And I think the other thing is that I think they need to have more. And I know you and I have had this conversation. More people in the conversation on politics that are
Yeah.
culturally aligned with more of America, that are more live like more of America, that are live in more of America, that circulate with people more in America. And I think part of the problem both parties have. The Democrats have it, as well as the Republicans on this. Is that there needs to be like people like me, for example. I'm a gun owner. I own 5 rifles. I go to church every week. And that I'm like a freaking unicorn or a Martian when I go up to New York most of the time, because that's not where people are, but that's where people are in where I live.
Yeah. I mean, people start talking about gun ownership, and I said, you really need to understand and not assume that they're all, kind of crazy right wing, folks who want to have bazookas. That's not who they are. And I got a gun safe here. I always tell this story, Matthew. After Sandy Hook, one of the greatest tragedies in American history, in North Dakota, the single largest expenditure as it related to guns was gun safes.
Yep.
Right. So think about that. I mean, that this is that the response was, look, we need to be more careful about access to our guns. And I
And
think,
most, as you know, you've talked to them. Most gun owners support
yeah,
common sense gun reform. Most
yeah.
gun owners support it.
Well, and again, it's always the extremes that get that media. But I love what you said about how few people are actually consuming that, but yet we consume it as pundits, or we consume it as people who do kind of political work under the assumption that everybody's watching this or everybody's paying attention. I always say the best thing that happened to me coming in and out of politics, leaving for 12 years, is I realized that I wasn't that big of a deal ever. It's just like people didn't wake up every morning saying, "What does Heidi Heitkamp think?" We could live pretty good lives without me around. Um, Matthew, on the time that we have left, and obviously, the goal of one country is to,
Yep.
we called it one country because we thought if you named it the Rural Project, it's further dividing the country. And
Yep.
I'm just firmly believe that what a cab driver, first generation American in New York wants is not that much different than a family farmer wants, right? But
Yep.
yet we draw these divisions, and so at one country, we're trying to figure out how we can lower the political temperature in rural America, get focused back on policy. What advice would you give to the administration as somebody who thinks about these issues as it relates to kind of uniting the country regionally?
So I think what you're doing is really needed and really great, and it's compelling for where our country is. So brava to you, and everybody else. So to me, is as there's basically, and you look at rural America and suburban America and urban America, there's general agreement on the policies. On the policy, if you ask, of course we should put more money in bridges. Of course we should put more money in roads. Of course we should do this. Of course we should have common sense gun reform. Of course we do this. But there's a cultural misalignment, and that it's the cultural misalignment, in my view, that makes it hard for politicians um, in Washington to convince somebody, especially in rural America, that though they might agree with them on policy, they don't think they agree. They don't think they're aligned with them on their same values. And they may be, but they just don't feel it. And so part of the thing is I think, again, I'll go back to this word, we have to have a level, there has to be a level of humility out of people to go when they go to the areas, they go to small towns, they go to small communities, they go to farm places with lots of farms and rural areas, that they have a sense of humility. And that, a part of the problem I think Democrats have often fallen into is they have a tendency to get into this lecture circuit where, like, I know better than you and what's good for you. And let me tell you what's good for you because I've studied it and this is what's good for you. So just go along with what I want. There's been a reaction, and it's been, Democrats, as you know, fully well, personally as well, there's been a reaction by rural communities to Democratic politicians in that way. And so I think they need to go back and understand and figure out a way to more culturally align themselves, not give up on values and not give up on issues, but culturally align themselves with people in rural America and people in small town communities. And if I think they did that, then people in those areas would say, yeah, I agree with you on those policies. And yeah, I agree with you on that. But until they do, they're not going to listen to you on the policies.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've been pushing for is I have this dream that Joe Biden shows up at the Memorial Day ceremony at our Veterans Cemetery and talks about his son and talks about his commitment to the troops. Joe Biden ends every speech with "May God protect our troops." That's something we hadn't heard for 4 years, and so I think that there are cultural alignments that are there. They're just never expressed in that way, and they're never seen, right? So it's got to be just not even said, but it's got to be communicated in a way that people get that you are somebody who cares deeply about this country, cares deeply about our veterans, cares deeply about our elderly, and making sure that they live a quality of life. I mean, there's so much that unites us culturally, and that never gets expressed because everybody is hyper focused on the thing that divides, because that's what the media covers.
Well, and I think division has become part and parcel of where they are. And I think the Republicans want to keep the division going because they know it benefits them in this way. And I think as people like you or others, you venture into this sort of like, hey, hold on, hold on, hold on. There's much that unifies us, and let's come together and let's figure out a way. You can be attacked on all sides in that, but that's where most of America is in this place. And we used to have regional politicians and regional parties that were able to represent that. The problem today is we don't anymore. We have two national parties that aren't sort of looking in coalitions within their own party primarily, but they're and before we used to have like Western Democrats and Eastern Republicans and Southern Democrats and California Republicans we you could, and then you build a coalition within that. We've nationalized the two parties in such a way now that it leaves many people out of it.
Yeah, I used to jokingly say I wouldn't be a very good New York Republican. I don't think I don't think I'd be liberal enough for the past
Yeah,
party.
in years gone by, because that was like Nelson Rockefeller.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I always remind people, Dick Ottinger, who is kind of a forgotten hero in American history, was one of the early leaders of the environmental movement when you couldn't drink, yeah, you couldn't eat the fish out of the Great Lakes.
Yep.
He was a New York Republican. And so this idea that we can't unite, we can unite, but if division equals power, then we've got to figure out how to take the power away from people who divide the country.
And
And
I think there's a role for there's roles for everybody in this. But I think if we look more at others and say, and not look at with more at others with humility and humbleness and not arrogance, we can accomplish a lot more.
I've been fortunate to meet a woman named Annie Duke, who is a poker player by, that's how she.
Yeah, I know who she is. I watched the Poker Channel.
I love Annie Duke, but she's got a PhD in behavioral science. I don't know if you know that. And she talks about kind of how she analyzed people's moves when they would do things that everybody said was crazy. She said, "Look, that my background, I would analyze it. Why are they doing this? Because I'm going to assume a level of respect and kind of this is rational behavior. So why is this happening?" And she's been I keep trying to ask her, okay, how do you start these conversations? How do you and Matthew, you didn't need a PhD, you pretty much said what she said, which is which is you've got to find that common ground and you've got to approach it respectfully, but also really probe, why do you believe this? I mean, one of the things that's been so hard is to see things that, if anybody's watching, like the thing we're in now, where now there's this revisionist history that the insurrection wasn't so bad and they were like tourists in the building. And I'm like, were you watching the same thing I was watching? I mean, and so you get to that point where you kind of then just assume that anyone who might agree is in the same mindset that on facts, and I don't know that that's true.
Well,
And
that's you can't have a democracy unless we're all willing to come together for the common good, and you can't come together for the common good if you don't have a common set of facts. And that's part of the problem with how media has been organized and the way people receive it and get it. It's now we now have completely different quote unquote fact sets that people have, and so I think what you're doing, what I try to do is, I think a big part of it is just telling the truth, not in like an insulting way, but here's the truth. Here's how it is. I care about you. I think you should be able to live your life in whatever manner that you think is the right way for you and your family. But we have to agree to some set of facts.
yeah, I mean, and I think that there's way too much at giving people leeway. I've heard people say, "Oh, well, capital gains are blah blah blah," and I'm like, "Well, I'm the former tax commissioner. I can tell you that's not what happens with capital gains, right?" And so, if you're going to make a decision on capital gains, fine. You think that this is, people who earn money by having money should be taxed at a lower rate than people who go to work every day. Just say that, but don't lie about what capital gains are. And so it's really hard, because I think now that there's no trusted source, right? In the past, there's been like that one person that you go to, oh, he's no bullshitter, right?
Yep.
A John McCain kind of guy that he may wink when he says something, but he was never, you know he was a guy who just said it the way he thought it was. I'm not saying he was always right, but he definitely believed that truth of what he was speaking. There's people who will lie with impunity and they know they're lying, and it's really, really hard.
Well, and I think That's to me, and whether somebody in your audience is deep blue, feels themselves deep blue or deep red, or listening and trying to figure this out and all this, I say, and they ask, what should I do? I always say is the first thing, vote for somebody that has integrity. Like, don't just start with there. Somebody that has integrity. You may disagree with them and you may not like some of the things they say, but start with integrity and move from there.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And so, Matthew, what's next for you? I need to know because I know you've been hard
Well,
working.
I'm hanging in my place here in Wimberley, Texas, which is awesome. Out in the enjoying my life. My daughter graduates from high school. My last kid graduates from high school the end of this month, which is great. She's going off to college in Maryland in Annapolis at St. John's College, which is great for her. And I'm gonna, think about what I want to do. I have a huge push within me to because I care. I love this country and I care about our democracy. I'm trying to figure out what I can do best to help our country move through this difficult time and get to the other side. So stay tuned. I hope you and I connect more and more and more along the way because I think we're very much in sync on this. But I care about our country and want to do whatever I can to make it what it should be.
Well, Matthew, I would encourage everyone who has a Twitter account to follow your Twitter because they will be inspired every day by the great quotes that you put up and by recognizing past philosophers and past writers who really should inspire us to live our lives at a higher level, ethically and morally. And so, thank you for that, and
Thank
thank
you.
you for always being the voice of reason, for always being somebody who will take the deep breath, not take the bait, and to just kind of say it the way it is. And I know that this country is better off because your voice is out there. And
Well,
so
thank you. I sometimes I do well. Sometimes I sometimes take the bait, and then I figure out, well, okay, I shouldn't have taken the bait, but I try. Every day I try.
I occasionally have taken the bait, but I have to tell you, you learn from those experiences,
Yes,
and
you do.
if every day you think about who do you want to be as a person, and I think that's how we grow, and
Yep.
that's hopefully how we're going to grow as a country. What do we want? I just close with one story that you might be interested in, Matthew. I met this young man at U Chicago, and he did door to door in Iowa, and he was trained to not say, "Are you going to support, JD Shulkin?" when he got to the door.
Hmm.
Automatically people get their guard up. And so the first question he asked at the door was, "What kind of America do you want to live in?" And he said, remarkably, it was really no different. I mean, we have so much that unites us,
I
and yet
totally 1,000% agree with that.
we've been pulled apart by people who want power as opposed to people who want to move this country forward. And that's where the integrity piece comes. And
Well,
so
God bless you, Heidi.
God bless you too, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so great, and let's reconnect. You're really a very special voice in American political thought today, and